Good morning. Thank you everyone for coming today. My name is Kevin, and this is my colleague Richard. We're both part of Appian Product Management in the engineering department at Appian, and we're here today to talk about debugging and monitoring your Appian applications. So, quick show of hands. Who of you have built an Appian app before? Okay, awesome, great. So you might have heard this before, but Appian runs on Appian. Almost all of our business workflows are done in Appian, and in fact, all the product management team is required to always be building an Appian application. So we do things like our project planning, the management of what teams are going to be working on what features across the years. We even take feedback from our customers and our partners, distill that into product use cases, and then triage them to different features and teams. So we have a little bit of a gamification, kind of like a leaderboard to see which PM is doing the best job triaging use cases. And we even do our annual HR performance reviews right from the user record in Appian. And I've conveniently left out the critical parts that my manager provided in my feedback, but you get the point that we all manage it right from there. And so we build a lot of apps in Appian in the product management team, and you might think that Richard and I are pretty big experts, but we still run into a few things. So I'm going to ask one more question. If you guys can raise your hands again for those of you who have built an app before. And now I want you to keep it raised if you've deployed your app to production and not encountered a bug or a performance issue. Okay, that's what I was thinking. And that's okay, because Richard and I, even though we are building apps all the time and we are at Appian, when we deploy our changes, we also run into issues and performance issues, bugs and performance issues. And it's really just kind of part of the software life cycle. So we're all there, and there are ways that we can get better at dealing with those. So I'm going to have Richard come in and talk a little bit about a story with app building that he's encountered.
Thanks, Kevin. So like Kevin said, at Appian, we run Appian, right? And as product managers within the engineering department, we're especially excited to see new features come out, even before they're fully baked, right? We love beta testing. Sometimes we bring our home environment down, and it's not the worst thing because we get to test some cool things out. This is a screenshot from our development environment from a couple of quarters ago, around 18.4. And this is a real screenshot of our development environment. And this is the monitoring page of the designer console. And what I want to point out here is that in 18.2, in 18.4, we released the process memory management feature, which allows you to see the memory of every single process on your system. That's really cool. But what do you notice? Before this feature was fully done, and I was very curious and excited to try this out on our very own home development environment, I wanted to see if I could surface anything interesting. I found a process instance that had been sitting around for over a year, taking over half a gig of memory. But before this feature, there was no way to tell if this was ever happening, because it wasn't actively impacting the system performance, and there was no way to tell what the amount of memory was consuming. It just kind of stuck around. So you can guess, the first thing I wanted to naturally do was find someone to call out. And so if you zoom in a little, we start to see a name that sticks out, Richard Lamb. And in case you weren't paying attention before, my name is Richard Lamb, and I'm a product manager at Appian. So what does that mean? We all make mistakes, even the experts. This actually happened in September of 2017, a couple months after I joined Appian. This is my very first app that I was building for Appian as a part of my rotation and training, and I had a lot to learn. Everyone has a lot to learn. Appian can do a lot of things, a lot of cool things, but we all run into trouble. You deploy, things go wrong, but it's natural. It happens to everyone, even the experts, even the product managers within engineering at Appian. But the point of all this is to say Appian can help. We've been building great features over the years that help you better monitor your system, and we continue to invest more. Troubleshooting, debugging, and system performance are top priorities for us, and we're going to talk about that today. So we're going to briefly go over all the features we've been working on the past couple of quarters, and especially focus on some of the new ones coming out in 19.2 that help you to better troubleshoot and debug issues right in your production system. And we're going to give you a good demo on how this all works together, how it plays well together, to really give you an idea of how you can leverage this power, especially in the upcoming 19.2 version. And at the end, we'll have some time, hopefully left over. We'll have a quick Q&A, give you a summary of everything we've talked about.
So how does Appian help you monitor your applications? Well, we've broke it down today in 3 major categories. We have the insights that we provide you as you're designing your application so that you can be aware of issues and fix them before they ever get to production. Then we have, once you deploy your application and it's running, we have observability and monitoring features that will just kind of be taking a look at the health of the system and surface any problems that might be coming up so you can be made aware of them. And then finally, because we know that Appian is not just the only piece of a system in your enterprise stack, we have the capabilities to extend the monitoring of Appian to your external enterprise IT monitoring tools. I'm going to start off with some of the design time insights. The first one I want to talk about has been around for quite some time. In fact, the performance view for Interface Designer has been around since Interface Designer. Appian 7.5, anyone remember that? No, maybe I'm showing my age. Okay, yeah, cool. We had Interface Designer and Editable Grids was actually 7.5 as well. But anyway, so the performance view allows you to see metrics about the loads of your interface. So it will show you all the time it takes to render that UI and what pieces and what rules are causing that timing. I bring it up now because we have made a few little enhancements over the last few quarters. One of them is that we've now made it way more easy to toggle between the interface preview and the performance view right from Interface Designer. And you're allowed to edit your interface while viewing the performance view. So you can instantly make your changes and see how that affects the performance view right there, or the performance of the interface right there. The last thing that we've added to Interface Designer Performance View is now the ability to capture the performance metrics of interface interactions. So previously, when you'd see the performance view, you would see the breakdown for the load time of the interface. But as we've given you more capability and sale across the few years, your UIs have gotten a lot more dynamic, right? Now clicking a button can start a process, query an external system, or write to the database. So now we're able to capture those metrics, and you can view them alongside the load times in the performance view. If you see in the animation here, there is now a Save Metrics tab, and that's where you'll see the interactions and what happens in those interactions. Now, Interface Designer is not the only designer with a performance view. In Appian 18.4, we released a performance view for record types. So right from Record Type Designer, you can now see the performance details for any of your record UIs, including your record lists, grid and feed style, and any of your designer configured views. You can even then pick a record instance to test that data on, use that test data for the performance analysis. And lastly, one that I want to talk about is you're always building process models, and as you're in the modeler designing your model, you can always run those right from the modeler, see where the flow will take you, and if there's an error, we'll call it out, and right from the modeler, you can drill in and see what the error was and steps to fix it. So those are all the things we provide while you're building your application, but once it's deployed, we want to surface any issues that come up in your production environment. Last year at Appian World, I was on one of these stages, and I announced the monitoring view in Appian Designer. This is a UI where we show all the process activity on your system. And since then, we've added a few new pages to the monitoring view. But I do want to first start with the process activity page, because it is a snapshot of all the process activity that's happening on your system, and you're allowed to filter on the status of the process, whether or not there's an error. You can view the error messages right from there, and you can also filter by who started a process or by particular process models. In 18.4, we released several features around the management of process memory. This is one that Richard just talked about a few minutes ago, and we're able to show you the memory usage of each instance on the system, and we are in the background always sizing these instances to have it up to date so you can know how they're affecting your system. To complement this, we also released a new page in the monitoring view. This is the process model metrics page. This gives us a high-level roll-up of each process model and how it's affecting your system performance. So you'll see that you can see a bunch of all the process models. We flag ones that we think are problematic to your system's health, and you can see their memory usage and other relevant information like the number of instances, what percentage of them are completed, and other things. I'll touch a little bit more on this in our demo, so I'm going to keep going. In Appian 19.2, which is coming out at the end of this month, we're releasing another page in the monitoring view called record response times. Now, always, anytime a user is interacting with a record, we're capturing the timings of those and analyzing their performance. So what you'll see in this new page is a list of all your different record UIs, lists and views, and then you'll see the top 10 slowest user interactions for each of those UIs. So we're going to be able to tell you what your users are experiencing and which users are seeing slow response times. Now that's great, but we took it a step further, and every time we're capturing these details, we're also providing the performance view. So now you can see the detailed breakdown of how long those UIs took to respond to your users automatically. It's just happening on your system, and there's nothing you need to do. We're just going to capture it for you. This is really great because it's going to help you track down those difficult to reproduce performance issues, because we're just collecting that information and it's going to be available for you. And you might have heard this at the keynote yesterday, but in 19.1, we released the concept of connected infrastructure. So now you have different Appian environments that can have knowledge of each other, and they can communicate with each other. So we've applied this concept to both the process model metrics and record response time pages. So a designer in their development environment can view these performance metrics that are happening in production. Now, this is great because obviously those designers are the ones that are going to be troubleshooting the performance and then making any changes that they need to. So we're now giving them the data or the metrics that they need to make those changes or understand how to make those changes right from their development environment. They don't even need access to production. And the last one I want to touch on is another thing that Appian is doing in the background for you. So as of a couple quarters ago, we are now always looking and monitoring the memory usage of expressions. If we're analyzing the memory usage of these expressions, and if we think it's going to affect the system performance, we're going to go ahead and kill that expression. You heard Malcolm yesterday call it the circuit breaker, and it's essentially like if we think that something might poorly affect the system, we're going to kill it, and then we'll log those events to a log somewhere so you can go reference them if you need to in the future.
So Kevin just spoke on a few things about the great features we have within the product, right, that help you better monitor your applications and the objects that you create and at deployment time. Now, we know that Appian is just one piece of software in your entire enterprise suite, right? It needs to be able to extend beyond the platform because you care about metrics outside of the product, right? So we do a couple things. First, it's log streaming. For our Premier Cloud customers since 18.4, we've started offering the ability to stream the most important logs directly from your cloud site to your local server. That means that you can get the most important logs like your application server log and system metrics hooked up directly to your enterprise monitoring tool so that you can see Appian as a part of your whole system. We're also building out SaaS-specific log solutions for log streaming. That means that we started with Sumo Logic and we've skipped the integration to your local server and it goes directly to your cloud monitoring tool of choice. We started with Sumo Logic because it's a brand new feature and that's where the most interest was. But as more customers sign up and more customers are interested, we're looking to add more providers like Splunk, AppDynamics, and Dynatrace. We're really excited about this. And finally, we couldn't possibly talk about monitoring without talking about the Appian Health Check. Most of you are probably familiar with it. Most of you probably run it today. You can schedule it on your own time, configure it to run when it's convenient for you and when it's right for you. And in addition to all the great metrics and data that we have in the system to help you better monitor performance and system health, we also have Health Check, which brings you even more data outside of the system so that you can get more metrics sent to Appian experts so that you can stack up and see how you're doing against our best practices. So, to summarize, how does Appian help you monitor your apps? Through 3 ways. Design time insights. We give you tools and features to help you troubleshoot and debug performance as you're building out your applications, as you're designing your objects. Then, once you've deployed it to production or even to your dev environment, we have native observability built in so you can better understand the state of your system as things are running, right? Process model memory, record response times. These are all things that are very critical to understanding how things are going after you've deployed your applications. And finally, extensibility beyond the platform. We don't stop just with the product because this is an enterprise piece of software. It's one tool in your entire bucket of things that you run. So we need to be flexible and to be able to hook into everything that you have. Now, that covers the features, but what we really want to talk about today is the demo. We want to show you how all these features that we've been working on and the new ones that are coming out in 19.2 play well together and how it might actually look like to be an Appian developer in your development environment and troubleshoot and debug real production issues. So we've got some data stage that Kevin and I pulled from the internet. Very simple some model cars, customers, orders, things like that. We've got a site set up, we've got a couple environments spun up, and we've got some data stage, and we're gonna run through this. So, reminder, Kevin's logged in as Kevin, the developer. He's in his development environment. We've got the site pulled up called the Model Vehicle Order Management site. First thing you land on is an order records list. It's very simple, right? We've got some orders listed, we've got customer. You can see things like ship dates and statuses with some rich text. Very simple. What we wanna do though is go to the third tab, the new order page. And this just lets us create a new order. So Kevin's gonna pick a customer, put in a date, add in a product, pick some quantities, and he'll submit this form. But what we really wanna focus on is the monitoring view, right? Everything that we just talked about now. So he's gonna switch back over to the designer console in our development environment as a developer. And the first page that we land on is a process activity page. And like Kevin mentioned, this was released last Appian World, and it lets you see all the activity that's happening with your processes in your system. You can see things like what's completed, what's in progress, what's been canceled, potential errors. And if you look at the very top, there's a yellow ribbon that nicely highlights for us, hey, you've got one error in your system. So Appian's being smart in the background. We're letting you know what areas you need to focus on for your process. And if you jump down to the grid, you can see there's 2 new processes for the ones that Kevin just created, for the create new order. And if you were paying close attention, he actually submitted the form twice. That's why you have 2 processes. And the second one actually submitted with an error, and that's indicated by both the yellow ribbon at the top and the red indicator by the process. So Kevin, why don't you hop in there and see what you can find?
Awesome, yeah. So right from the process activity page, I can also filter down to processes with errors. In this case, it's a little bit of overkill, but it's helpful on your system when you have a lot of instances running. I can also view the error message right from here if I wanted to. But what I will do is I'm going to open up the process instance just by clicking on this link. This will take us into the modeler, and I'll see the instance and where it errored out. We can see that the node is highlighted, and I can just double click and view the error message from there. Now, in this case, the write to data store entity node broke because we passed it in blank to data, and it didn't want any null values, so which is why we threw this error. And that's because I didn't have any validations on that form, and if you saw, I double-clicked the submit button, and so the second time I went and I just submitted a bunch of blank data.
Great. So, second tab that we have in the monitoring view, process model metrics. Kevin spoke a little bit about this before. Where the process activity tab is a great place to see what all your processes are doing, you also want aggregated information, right, at a process model level. How are my models doing? What's the total amount of memory they're consuming? How are they performing? So this tab shows a lot of that, right? You can see the total memory for each of your process models. We have things like average process instance memory by model. You can see the number of instances that have been run by model. You can see how many have been completed. We've even brought in the cleanup days from the process modeler in here. It's a very powerful form. But what's even more neat about this is that we've hooked it up with a process activity tab. So if you click on the number of instances in the process model metrics tab, it'll redirect you to the first tab, process activity, filter on the model you just selected, and from here, if you show the process details, you can see exactly how much memory every single one of those instances is consuming. This is exactly what I did when this feature first came out and I was testing in our own development environment at Appian. You can easily tell if there's an outlier, something that's running away with a lot of memory that you wouldn't normally expect. You can see how things are doing by model, if things are running as you would expect, if everything seems to be consistent. Is the memory high for each of these instances by the model? It's a great way to be able to monitor the performance of your processes. So switching back to process model metrics, reminder, we're in our development environment as Kevin, the developer, but what we really want to know, what we really care about is how is my production system performing? What is my system like with real load, real data, real usage? How do we do that? We can leverage our DevOps infrastructure. With a few simple clicks, we can go and peer in directly to our production environment directly from our dev environment. So Kevin's going to switch over, and what do we see? It's a similar screen. But what you'll notice is that immediately something is highlighted for us, right? Whereas before there were a bunch of green, small load, testing, everything's running as expected, we see this red frowny face, right? Appian's doing a lot in the background to let us know, hey, we've identified a model that you might want to check out because it's got really, really high memory. So what does that mean? Well, Appian tells us this is the model you should look at, and we can ask a few questions from there, right? What does high total memory mean for a model? Well, if we look at the average process instance memory, is that high? If it is, there's a few questions we can ask from there. Is there an outlier that we found like I did in my own development environment? Or do things seem to be generally high? Maybe that means I have a bad design. Maybe I've done something that has caused every single one of these instances to load up just to consume a ton of memory. If I look at the instance count, is that high? Maybe the design is fine, but it just means that I haven't cleaned up my data quickly enough or I could do it more efficiently. Maybe I've got a lot of data sticking around for 30 days, a month, half a year, and I end up consuming tons and tons and a couple of gigs of data. Or maybe if I look at the completion percentage, I can say that I've got a slight design error or a slight design inefficiency, and that they're not consuming a ton of data, but they're sticking around because they haven't closed quick enough. They haven't completed quickly enough. Maybe I forgot the terminate node, something like that. But I think for this process model, I just want to change the cleanup days. A month sounds a little long. 30 days is probably longer than I want. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, exactly. Those are the type of things I would look at. And in this case, we see that the average memory is not very high. And there's a lot of instances that are just completed and sitting around. The only reason that you'd want these to stick around for, let's say, 30 days is if you're trying to query that data, or if you need it for audit purposes, or maybe referencing it in debugging. But in our case, we know that we probably don't need it at all. So we're going to go ahead and change it so that these archive immediately after they finish. So I'm going to go ahead into the properties dialog, go to the data management chat tab, and just set that to 0 so we can archive instantly. I'll go ahead and save and publish this. And now that we're saving and publishing this, we'll make sure that we include it in our patch when we deploy to production again.
Awesome. So we just talked about the first two tabs in the monitoring view, and they both center around processes, right? Process instances and models, memory, process activity, things like that. But what I'm really excited to talk about today is something that's coming out brand new in 19.2. You heard at the keynote, Kevin hit on it briefly today. It's the record response times tab. This feature is capturing every single record response time in the background for you automatically without you having to do anything. That means for every record interface that you load, we're going to capture the response time. We're going to store off the slowest ones for you. We're going to tell you who ran it, when they ran it, and exactly how long it took to run. But what's even cooler on top of that is we're storing off the performance view for every single one of these record interactions. That means that you can open up the performance view metrics tree and figure out exactly why that interface might be slow, down to the rule and down to the expression. But remember again, we're in our development environment. We're logged in as Kevin, the developer. What do we really actually care about? We want production metrics. We want to know what is this performing like in my production system with real load, with real users, and real usage. So what do? We leverage our DevOps infrastructure again. We continue to invest in this. So with a few simple clicks from our development environment, I can switch over to production. The data updates, you can see, things aren't as green in production always, right? They don't always perform the way we expect, especially when we're first rolling out an application. There's some orange, there's some red. We see different response times. It's very natural. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you how this works in real time. So Kevin's going to switch over back to our site. He's going to log in as Michael.manager.
On our production system.
On our production environment. Thank you. We land on the site that we saw before. Defaults to the orders record list. And Kevin's going to open up one of the records. Let's see how long it takes to load. A couple seconds. 3, 4, maybe 5. It's a nice looking UI. I think it took about 5 seconds to load. So now Kevin's going to switch back to his developer account in the development environment. We've used the DevOps infrastructure to peer in on our production system to see response times from our production environment as a developer logged into the development environment. Once he refreshes the page, you can see the brand new entry. We automatically captured that response time in the background without you having to do anything. It tells you it was in 6 seconds, Michael.manager, 11:49 a.m. And now he's going to open up the performance view, and this is where the magic happens. Let us know what you can find there, Kevin.
Sure. As Richard mentioned, as we're capturing these response times, we're also performing the performance analysis so that you can see exactly what's happened when that user was interacting with this record. What you'll see is a breakdown of the different configurations of your record UI and how that affects the performance. So you have things like your interface definition, how long the data query took, and even the related action shortcuts and list of views and the security we do to check for that. Now, normally when I'm debugging performance issues, the first thing I look at is this representative of what I see in development, or in my development environment? So I kind of compare what we see in prod to dev. And a way that I would do that here is to open up the record type, the order record type in Record Type Designer, which I can do conveniently from this link. So right now we're looking at the performance data from production, but I'm going to open up our actual object in the designer and run the performance view there to see what we're seeing on the development environment. So like we mentioned earlier, we added a performance tab here in the Record Type Designer, and that is going to go ahead and run the performance view for our different record UIs. We're able to select the different ones. It starts off with the record list, but we're interested in the summary view right now. It prompts me to do a record instance, so I can have some test data to use in the performance analysis. And then we're able to use that and then run the performance view. You can see that here it took about 1.3 seconds, which is a lot less than the 6 seconds. So right then we know that there's something different between our production and our development environments. Most commonly it has to do with your user context, the types of groups that the user that viewing it is in, the different scale of data that you're dealing with, and maybe conditional logic in your interfaces. So I'm going to go back to the monitoring view and our performance view dialog. And now that I know that it's probably something to do with the data there, I start looking at the performance view, and I usually focus my search in here in this descendant functions and query rules grid. And I look for normally 3 key things. The first thing I look for is the amount of queries that are being done on the UI. And it's very easy to see that in the count column here on this grid. And I can see that there's 168 queries being run, which sounds pretty aggressive. The other 2 things I look for are the amount of looping functions that are done. So I can see that there's a for each, but that only happens 3 times. It's probably OK. I think I've already narrowed it down to the query. But then the other thing that I look for is the amount of components that are being rendered on the interface. So I look at things like card layouts and rich text display fields. And you can tell that there are a few there. And when we saw Michael Manager open up that UI, we could see that it was kind of a complex UI. But I think I'm going to focus my search on this query count. It's a lot of queries. So if I go back to the dev environment, viewing the performance data there, I can see that there's also 38 queries being done in this instance too, which for something that only takes 1.3 seconds, okay, sounds kind of great, but really it's ridiculous that it's doing that many queries. So I'm going to go ahead and track that down. So I'm going to go and open up the summary views interface and kind of look at its definition and see if there's something I can do to maybe optimize its performance. So I'm just going to navigate to it right from the view definition. I can control-click to open that in Interface Designer. And I'm just going to take a little look at this interface's definition. And immediately I start seeing this get product details query being called for, it looks like, every single field looped over every single card. Richard, is that you? Because I know you don't have a great track record. Did you lose sound too? No. There you are. Sorry, we lost our sound in our headphones.
That's you.
You got it? Okay. Well, anyway, there's a lot of queries going on. I think it might have been Richard. Thankfully, I have some magical code.
You need a mic.
I have some.
You're Richard.
Up here? Oh, it's Kevin. Here, let's get you now.
All right. Thank you. All right. Sorry about that. Now, as I was saying, I have some magical code updates to make here to optimize the performance here. What I'm going to do is, just do a single query at the beginning of the interface to grab all the data and then loop through that instead of doing all those queries on the fields that Richard ignorantly did when he built this UI. So I'm going to save that off. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and run the performance view again, just to see what type of updates it made to our record type. Hopefully we made some optimizations. So I'm going to go ahead and reselect our record instance. And what I can see is it's definitely faster. Now it's only 300 milliseconds. And instead of 38 queries, we have 3. Now, I'm pretty confident that's probably the reason why that production data was running slowly, or that UI was running slowly. So I feel good about those changes, and I think I'm going to want to go ahead and push those to production. So I'll close this out. We can see that I was able to use our production data to then go ahead and help troubleshoot right from my development environment, because I'm the right person to be doing that as a designer. So now that we've made those two updates, we used the process model metrics tab to tell us about poorly performing process models, and the record response times tab to see what record UI slowness we're seeing. I was able to make some updates to our interface and our process model. So now I'm going to create a patch to then go ahead and push it to production. You might have saw this at the keynote yesterday, but we do have a new feature leveraging the DevOps infrastructure the same way that our metrics features are leveraging them. And it's the compare application across environments tool. So right here, I can select which environment to compare my app from. So I'm now going to run the comparison between the application on our development environment and production. It knows immediately that these are the two objects I've changed, and I can view the diff between the two systems. So I can quickly pull this up. I can see that this is the interface I just edited. I added this single query and got rid of a bunch of these. So it checks out. And then I'm going to go ahead, add these to the patch, and get ready to export the patch. But before I even do that, I'm able to inspect the patch on the production system right from this dialog. So that way I can see if there's any issues with this patch, or if I'm missing any precedents. You can see that it checks out, there's no errors, and there's no missing precedents. So I'll go ahead and export that patch. Now, of course, based on your company's deployment practices, you might have different ways that you might end up then importing this. But from this, this UI, you can at least now diff between the objects, know what you need to construct your patch with, and then quickly export it. That's all I got, Richard.
Cool. So that was the demo, right? We saw a lot about how to monitor the performance of your system, troubleshoot issues from your development environment as a developer into your production, right? That's pretty cool. But we wouldn't. So to summarize, what are the features and tools that Appian offers to do this? Well, we have more design tools than ever to spot performance issues, right? Things like the performance view in the record type designer, things like the performance view in the interface designer, the error debugger in the process modeler, right? We care about giving you the power to debug issues as you're designing them in your development environment. On top of that, observability after deployment. What does the state of my system? How are things performing after I've gone to production? We also care about that too. It's a full lifecycle development. And finally, extensibility beyond the platform. Not only do we have metrics and powerful insights within the product, we allow Appian, the platform, to extend to the rest of your enterprise because we don't want it to live on an island. So you guys can all go back to your departments, talk about all the great things you learned today, and you're going to seem like a genius in your ability to debug, monitor, and spot performance issues within your development environment and within your production environments, right, using the DevOps infrastructure. So what's next? We talked a lot today, upgrade to 19.2. All of the features that you see, a lot of them have come out in 18.4, 19.1, but the record response times, among other things, and the connected environments, DevOps infrastructure for that, 19.2. Very powerful release, would highly encourage you to upgrade. Go see everything new in 19.2 and the Dev Jam later today. On top of all the other monitoring stuff, we got great new features outside of that. And finally, if you still want to learn more about monitoring, which I encourage you do, go look up the Appian playbook and search for monitoring. And finally, especially for our cloud customers, and if you want log streaming and things like that, get Premier support. It's really great. That concludes our presentation.